She laughed at me in front of 80 guests, called me Dramatic Maddie like always. Then her fiancé turned, stunned, and said, "Wait, you're a judge? I'm Maddie Carter. I've never needed attention, but that invitation changed everything." Ever gotten a letter that pulled you back into a past you thought you'd buried? Share your story below. How did your family define who you were supposed to be? I've written verdicts that changed lives, but I never thought a wedding invitation would make my hands tremble. The envelope sat atop a modest stack of mail on my console table, cream-colored and far too thick to be casual. A faint rose and vanilla scent wafted from it, oddly artificial, like someone trying too hard to say, "I'm refined now." I let it sit while I unzipped my rain-dampened boots, hung my coat, and returned to the warm haven of my living room. Jazz floated gently from the speaker, an old Coltrane track I played every rainy night, almost by ritual. The air held the faint scent of Earl Grey, and my tea had gone cold in its ceramic mug. Legal opinions sat open on my laptop, dimmed slightly by my inattention. I had been marking up an appellate draft in the Eastman case when the door buzzed. And now the envelope. I finally opened it with the letter opener Judge Chappell gave me on my first year on the bench. Caroline's name hit me in curling calligraphy. Caroline Carter and Jason Whitman. Request the pleasure of your company. The rest blurred. Enclosed inside, tucked neatly like a jab in the ribs, was a note card. She'd written it in her precise, breezy cursive, unchanged since high school. "Try not to wear anything too serious." I stared at it for a while, letting the meaning settle. That emoji winked at me like it always had. Caroline's brand of charm that walked the razor-thin line between flirtation and condescension. I could almost hear her voice in my head, sweet with just enough vinegar. The rain whispered against the window panes. I held the invitation in one hand, leaned back into the couch, and closed my eyes. When we were kids, Caroline used to tell people I wasn't really her sister, that I had been found reading legal dictionaries in the Boston Public Library and brought home out of pity. I never corrected her, I just read more. Knowledge was the one place she couldn't follow me. Caroline always sparkled. She'd breeze through rooms with effortless confidence, smiling that picture-perfect smile. She wasn't cruel, not overtly, but she didn't need to be. The world bent toward her like a flower to sunlight. I was the background, precise, quiet, responsible. When she sang in school plays, I ran lines with her in the garage. When she posed in her prom dress, I held the camera. In every photo from our childhood, my expression was the same, neutral, as if I were just visiting the family I happened to belong to. I sipped the lukewarm tea. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle, then silence again. My apartment was quiet in a way I had curated over years. Soft lighting, sleek furniture, shelves of case law and Baldwin novels. The walls bore no photographs. The only sign of family was a small, framed picture of my law school graduation, carefully placed behind a stack of appellate briefs. Caroline had skipped the ceremony. My phone buzzed. Judge Chappell. "You'll love the headline tomorrow. Your Eastman opinion is going viral in legal circles." Scalia would have blushed. I allowed myself a smile. I had spent a week refining that opinion, dissecting precedent and framing the argument like a sculptor shaving marble. My name wouldn't be in the tabloids, but in the right rooms, the ones that mattered, I was known. And yet, here I was, pausing in the middle of a rainy Tuesday because Caroline Carter had sent a perfumed invitation. What did that say about me? I stood and walked over to the window. The city glistened with wet light, headlights bending through the mist. I tapped the edge of the invitation against my palm. Attending the engagement party would mean flying to Napa, a vineyard probably. There would be champagne towers and curated playlists and soft-focus photographers capturing golden hour. Caroline would glide through it like she always did. And I'd stand in a corner, mistaken for someone's lawyer or the event planner. Still. The words formed in my throat before I knew I'd speak them. Not for them, for me. I returned to the couch, placed the invitation back in its envelope, and pulled my laptop closer. My fingers hovered for a beat before typing, "Boston to Napa, direct flights." In a room full of curated smiles and rented jewelry, silence is the most expensive thing I wear. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I stepped out of the black sedan. A valet in a crisp blazer greeted me with a too-wide smile and whisked the car away before I could second-guess myself. The late afternoon sun cast warm golden stripes across the sprawling vineyard estate, soaking everything in a shade of elegance I didn't belong to. It smelled of lavender, rain-polished stone, and entitlement. I was 5 minutes early. Not because I was eager, I just didn't know how to stop being a judge, even in social settings. A server in a silk vest offered a coupe of champagne as I entered the main courtyard. I accepted it without a word and glanced around. The seating chart was mounted on a wrought iron easel in the shape of a wine bottle, each name written in looping gold script on blush paper leaves. A signature cocktail station to my left boasted options like the Caroline Cosmo and Napa Negroni, garnished with dehydrated citrus and edible flowers. It was all very Instagram ready. I stood still for a moment, surveying the scene. Clusters of guests in soft pastels fluttered like petals from table to table. Designer heels clicked across the travertine patio, conversations bubbling with polite laughter and phrases like destination honeymoon and he's from the East Coast firm. Men in tailored jackets adjusted their cuffs. Women tilted their heads just so for perfect lighting beneath the string lights. And then there she was. Caroline glided through the crowd in a floor-length gown of gold sequins that shimmered like Prosecco in the sun. She hugged people effortlessly, laughed at the right pitch, touched elbows and shoulders with instinctive grace. Someone handed her a flute, and she raised it in a mini-toast that drew spontaneous applause. It was a performance she'd perfected, and I could almost admire the skill if it hadn't always come at someone else's expense. She hadn't seen me yet. My dress was black, sleek, no frills, a column of stillness against the froth. I sipped the champagne, not because I liked it, but because I needed something to hold. Caroline finally spotted me across the courtyard. Her smile froze for half a second, an imperceptible hitch most people would miss. But I'd seen it before, growing up. She made her way over like a hostess greeting a complicated donor. "Maddie," she said, her voice light and floating, like a song she wasn't really singing. "Didn't expect you to show." Her eyes dropped to my dress. "That dress? Very Maddie." "Black never competes," I replied evenly. "It listens." She blinked, not sure if I'd meant it as a compliment or insult. Then she leaned in, the sequins on her shoulder brushing against my arm. "Just don't make things awkward, okay?" she murmured. "Ethan's family is traditional." "Maybe they'll ask real questions," I said. "Could be fun." Her lips tightened. "Maddie, please." I didn't answer. We both knew I wouldn't cause a scene. I never did. That was her territory. Sparkle, stir, retreat. From behind us, a voice called her name. "Caroline, over here! Group shot!" She was gone in a second, swept away like a golden leaf in a polished breeze. I wandered toward the edge of the patio where a flower wall rose in blush and ivory. A professional photographer hovered nearby, adjusting lenses. Guests tilted their heads together, smiling without meaning it. I stepped away from the photos, away from the drinks, the curated perfection. Inside the main hall, Ethan was talking with someone who looked like a congressman. His tie was slightly off-center, and his expression carried a touch of impatience. When he saw me, he paused. "You must be Maddie," he said, crossing the room with a practiced handshake. "I've heard fragments." "Then I'll try to stay consistent," I said, offering my hand. He laughed, more warmly than I expected. "Caroline talks about you. You're a judge, right?" "I try to be." He seemed puzzled, like he hadn't expected humor. "She said you were brilliant." "She says a lot of things." Caroline appeared just then, looping her arm through his. "Ethan, darling, come. Dad wants a word before we do the toast." He smiled at me again, but it was smaller now, like he'd realized he'd stepped into something with more weight than expected. The room filled quickly after that. The sun lowered behind the vines, casting long amber shadows. Waitstaff passed trays of Prosecco with raspberries floating inside. Laughter rose like steam. My parents arrived late. Dad said nothing. Mom wore a lavender shawl too bold for the setting and greeted everyone with an almost manic cheer. I found a seat near the back, next to the ice sculpture. When Caroline took the microphone for her toast, she shimmered like a champagne bottle just uncorked. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice silky, practiced. "It means the world to us to be surrounded by so much love." She gestured toward Ethan, her smile stretched wide. "I'm marrying the kindest, funniest man I've ever met, and I have my family to thank for showing me how to love boldly, especially my sister Maddie, who taught me boundaries." A ripple of polite laughter. She leaned slightly forward, catching the crowd. "When we were teenagers, I borrowed her cashmere sweater without asking, just once. She filed a formal grievance with our parents, like In writing, cited household statutes. The laughter grew louder. Glasses clinked. Someone at a nearby table said, "That's so Maddie." "She's not great at parties," Caroline added, letting the silence stretch just long enough. "But she's here. So, thanks, Maddie." My name floated in the air, absurdly fragile. She raised her glass toward me. I lifted mine in return, slowly, deliberately, and held it aloft, but didn't drink. Across the room, Ethan was watching me. His smile faltered. They called me the quiet one. Turns out quiet has teeth. Dinner had settled into its symphony of clinks and murmurs. The vineyard's main hall was awash in candlelight, gold-flecked place cards, and the distant echo of a string quartet playing something that was probably Mozart, but felt more like static in a velvet-lined room. Conversations drifted like perfume, polite and pointed, looping around real estate, colleges, destination baby showers. I sat at table 7, alone. My plate was a still life. Smoked duck, spring greens, and a blush-colored vinaigrette in an artistic swoop. The duck was cooling quickly. I'd taken exactly one bite. Beside me, a woman in a mauve sheath dress chatted with a man who kept adjusting his cufflinks between sips of white wine. Neither had asked my name. They assumed I was filler, someone's date, a cousin perhaps, or a placeholder in black. Across the room, Caroline laughed too loudly. Her hands moved as she told a story, touching shoulders, tapping elbows. The table she held court at leaned toward her, as though drawn by gravity. I reached for my water glass just as Ethan appeared beside me. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty seat across from mine. I nodded. He sat carefully, folding his napkin across his lap like he'd done it 1,000 times for all the wrong reasons. His tuxedo was tailored but not lived in. His cufflinks were engraved, understated. His fork scraped gently across his plate as he looked up at me with a practiced kind of curiosity. "Caroline said you work with the government?" His voice was polite, inquisitive, not probing, like someone trying to solve a crossword clue without giving away how badly they wanted the answer. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took another slow sip of water and placed the glass down with precision. The air between us stretched thin, like tissue paper waiting to tear. "I'm a judge," I said. He blinked, smiled. "A judge?" he echoed, as though I'd mispronounced a more acceptable word. Caroline arrived just in time to intercept. "Oh, Maddie's always been dramatic," she sang, sliding behind Ethan's chair. "She means she works in the courts, records, admin, that kind of thing." I turned to her. 11th District, I said. "Boston, federal bench." The conversation behind us didn't stop. It slowed. A few words hung in the air too long. A fork paused mid-air. The woman beside me turned slightly, her shoulder freezing just enough to notice. Ethan frowned. "Wait, you're a judge? As in, Judge Maddie Carter," said a voice to my right. A man I hadn't spoken to all evening. Mid-50s, horn-rimmed glasses, tweed blazer with elbow patches. Probably a law professor or someone who'd been one before retiring to wine country. He squinted as he pulled out his phone and tapped quickly. "Oh, wow," he muttered, more to himself. "Is she the one who wrote the Eastman opinion?" Another voice. "That case about qualified immunity?" Now the table behind us had gone completely quiet. The photographer, mid-snap, lowered her lens. Ethan looked at me again, but this time it wasn't the gaze of a groom making small talk with a sister-in-law. It was the look of a man realizing a puzzle piece had been deliberately flipped upside down. "You're the judge," he said softly. "You're that Judge Carter." I didn't nod, didn't blink. I let the words settle. From across the room, Caroline stood frozen near the flower wall, her flute of champagne tilted but untouched. Her mouth parted just slightly, the edges of her smile fraying like silk catching on a nail. Someone whispered near the back of the room, not quietly enough. "She ruled on Eastman. That was everywhere last month." The room, once flush with curated joy and sparkling noise, now thrummed with a new kind of energy, half reverence, half recalibration. All those designer heels were still planted, but postures changed, shoulders squared, necklines straightened. Someone else Googled me. I could feel it like static behind my ears. I didn't need to speak again. That was the thing about being underestimated. When the verdict landed, it didn't require volume. Ethan sat straighter, his glass still in his hand but forgotten. I could see it behind his eyes, the way he recalculated our first conversation, the wedding invitation, the awkward joke Caroline had made about me being good with paperwork. And Caroline, still frozen, still smiling, barely. I picked up my fork, took a small bite of the duck. It was cold, but the flavor held. When people finally see you for who you are, they either apologize or double down. The air had shifted. Dinner had ended, replaced by the hum of low conversations and the gentle clatter of dessert forks. Beyond the glass doors of the estate, the vineyard terrace shimmered under fairy lights like a scene arranged for a magazine cover. It should have felt magical. Expensive lights strung overhead, manicured boxwoods hugging the edges, and the sharp scent of spring jasmine curling into the evening. Instead, it felt like I was walking onto a stage I never auditioned for. I stepped outside with my espresso, the paper cup warming my fingers. A breeze tugged at the hem of my black dress. I could hear the guitar before I saw it. Someone strumming a soft indie tune, half-remembered, all atmosphere. I came out for air, and for silence. But they followed. Not immediately. At first, it was just murmurs. 2 guests stepping out with wine, another couple claiming a fire pit table. Then came the soft glances in my direction, tilted heads, half-finished sentences replaced by a name. Mine. Judge Carter. She ruled Eastman, didn't she? Oh my God, that case with the housing clause, remember? Did you see Caroline's face? A man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, kind eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses, approached with the easy respect of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed, but enough to know when something mattered. I just wanted to say, he began, I'm a public defender. Oregon. Your opinion in the Eastman ruling, it restored a lot of hope for us, for our clients. I blinked. That kind of acknowledgement usually came by email, filtered through a clerk. Not here, not under fairy lights with a cup of espresso. Thank you, I said. My voice was steady, quieter than his, but somehow it carried. He nodded and stepped back, not lingering. Another guest beside him pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. A second later, someone took a photo. Casual, but deliberate. I turned slightly, letting the moment pass like fog on stone. Then came her voice. So now you're a celebrity? Caroline asked, the words polished with champagne but sour underneath. She stood just beyond the floral arch, radiant in gold sequins and just enough fury to sharpen every syllable. Her smile didn't quite make it to her eyes. Her earrings sparkled with every twitch of her head, but the only glitter I saw was malice. I mean, wow. I spent weeks planning the most important night of my life, and suddenly it's the Maddie show. She let out a laugh, the kind that was supposed to sound amused but cracked at the edges. Truly, sis, you hijacked my party with a court ruling. I didn't answer. I took a sip of the espresso, lukewarm now, but still bitter enough to suit the moment. You could have told me, she said, stepping closer. Her voice was lower, sharper, private in tone, but not in audience. You made me look like a liar. I turned, finally facing her. She was shorter than me, but she always carried herself like the ceiling bent to her height. You were, I said, calm, direct. Caroline blinked. Her lips parted in disbelief, as if the truth should have come with a bow. From behind her, a few heads turned. Our mother, now seated by a potted olive tree, looked mortified. Her lipstick had faded and her eyes darted between us like someone searching for the exits in a burning room. This isn't the place, she said in a hushed voice, the kind of whisper you learn in church pews and family funerals. I didn't look at her. It never is, I replied. That silenced them. Even the guitarist hesitated, letting his chords drift into nothing. The espresso cart hissed quietly in the background, an unintended percussion to our unraveling. Caroline's composure faltered for half a breath. Then she squared her shoulders, adjusted the strap of her dress, and turned on her heel. The sequins flared one last time as she disappeared inside, leaving behind only perfume and tension that clung like smoke. Our father stood near the railing. He didn't follow. Instead, he sipped something dark and amber, pretending to be fascinated by the horizon. When our eyes met, he gave me a look I recognized instantly, the polite nod of avoidance, like always. I'd spent a lifetime filling in silence, learning to read what wasn't said, but now, in this moment, I let the silence speak for itself. I had never been loud, not in this family, but I had learned how to be still in a way that drew attention, like the pause before a verdict. Ethan appeared beside me a minute later. The golden boy charm was gone. He looked older under the fairy lights, like someone who'd glimpsed a painting and realized it was a mirror. His hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, and for the first time, he didn't look sure of what to say. Was I supposed to find out like this? He asked. I turned toward him. He looked tired, not angry. You were never supposed to find out at all, I answered. He stared at me, the silence between us not quite warm but not hostile either, like standing in a courtroom after the jury's gone. A breeze lifted again, carrying the scent of espresso and roses. I stayed where I was. I didn't chase Caroline. I didn't soften my words for Ethan. I had spent years folding myself into a version of quiet they found acceptable. But tonight, quiet had spoken. It's amazing how a single night can make your childhood echo louder than ever. The vineyard's gravel driveway crunched beneath my heels as I stepped away from the terrace lights, leaving behind laughter I no longer believed in. The cool air bit at my bare arms. I slipped off my shoes again. I'd worn them twice, both times for Caroline. Both times, I bled. I pulled out my phone. The screen blinked low battery, 10%. I swiped up the Uber app and requested a ride back to the hotel. Estimated arrival, 7 minutes. That felt generous. Most things in my life had shown up late, or not at all. Behind me, the glow of fairy lights stretched like a false memory. I could still hear the murmur of guests piecing together what they'd just learned. About me, about Caroline, about the rift that no toast or wine could cover. They were polite enough not to ask directly, but I could feel the question hanging in the air, like pollen. I leaned against a wooden post near the edge of the parking lot and texted Judge Patel. Leaving early, not the courtroom, but still a win. The typing bubble didn't appear. He was probably asleep, 3 time zones away. I wasn't sure I even wanted a reply. Footsteps approached, deliberate, clipped. My mother's perfume reached me before her voice did. White gardenia. She always wore it too heavy. You embarrassed her. Her voice was low, meant to sting without being heard. She didn't come closer, just hovered, arms crossed, holding her clutch like a shield. I told the truth, I said. She worked so hard for this night. I looked at her, really looked. The sequins on her neckline trembled slightly in the breeze, like they were afraid to fall off. Her lipstick had bled into the lines around her mouth. I know, I replied, and I didn't ruin it. That was already in motion. My mother's eyes narrowed. You always think you're above everything. No, I said quietly. I just stopped needing permission. She didn't respond. Instead, she tightened her jaw and turned back toward the lights. That was her answer. That had always been her answer. Ethan appeared next, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, jacket folded over one arm. He looked more like someone leaving a fundraiser than a man about to get married. She built everything on a version of you that doesn't exist, he said, voice neutral. I met his eyes. She's not the only one. A beat passed between us, thick, uncertain. He shifted his weight like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the shape of it. I didn't offer help. Some silences are meant to stay broken. I liked your toast, I said, giving him a faint smile. I didn't give one, he replied. Exactly. The Uber's headlights cut through the dark as it turned into the gravel lot. I bent down, picked up the rose gold envelope Caroline had handed me 2 days ago. I hadn't even opened the second card inside. It didn't matter now. I walked to the nearest trash bin, a silver can tucked behind a row of lavender bushes, and dropped the envelope in. It made no sound, just disappeared. Ethan watched me. So this is it? I think it always was, I said, pulling my blazer tighter around my shoulders. I opened the Uber's back door. The driver gave me a tired nod. I slid in and exhaled as the door shut with a soft click. For the first time all evening, I felt the air clear. We pulled onto the road. I didn't look back. Not at the fairy lights, not at Ethan, not at the family that only saw me when it was convenient. My phone buzzed. Reminder, sentencing Monday, 9:03 a.m. I stared at it, then smiled. Reality was waiting. And for once, I was ready to meet it on my terms. Caroline had centerpieces and matching napkins. I have a courtroom and a gavel. The sun cut thin slats across the marble floor as I stepped into chambers, still buttoning my black robe. The routine felt like muscle memory, like an anchor. Boston's early traffic had already begun its daily low roar beyond the courthouse walls, but inside, everything was still. I paused by the mirror near my bookshelf. My reflection stared back, tired maybe, but sure. I adjusted the robe collar, then pulled my hair into its usual low twist. No jewelry, no perfume, no need. This space didn't ask me to shrink, to smile, or to apologize. I opened the door to the courtroom. The clerk was already there, flipping through the morning docket with practiced ease. A bailiff stood near the door, nodding as I passed. The courtroom itself was half full, attorneys, observers, a few reporters who still followed my name after Eastman. I took my seat behind the bench. The wood beneath my fingers was familiar, polished but imperfect, like everything worth trusting. I looked out across the room. No one here cared who wore sequins on Saturday. They came for judgment, quiet, fair, and final. The clerk stood. Commonwealth vs. Rivera. A young man was led in, late 20s, nervous energy in his shoulders. His attorney leaned in and whispered something before stepping back. I glanced at the file. Theft, prior warnings, a mother who'd written me a letter, a manager who'd begged for leniency, and restitution. The case wasn't clean, but rarely were they. The defense attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client acknowledges his actions. We're not here to excuse them, but to provide context. He's caring for his younger siblings after their father left. The money was taken for overdue rent. He turned himself in. I watched the defendant. His hands were clasped, knuckles white. He wouldn't meet my gaze. I understand the pressures, the attorney added, but we believe incarceration would do more harm than good. Probation and mandatory work hours, coupled with restitution. The prosecutor objected. Standard. I listened. They both made sense. That was the hard part. I took a breath. Sympathy, I began, voice steady, does not override accountability, but accountability can still have dignity. The room stilled. I looked at the young man. You made a series of choices. Desperation does not erase consequence. However, your willingness to accept those consequences matters. He blinked rapidly. His attorney placed a hand lightly on his arm. I continued, you will complete 200 hours of community labor. You will pay restitution over 18 months, and you will meet with a probation officer weekly. He nodded, eyes glassy. I closed the file. The clerk smiled faintly and whispered as she reached for the next document. That's why they call you the Hammer. I allowed myself the smallest smirk. It wasn't about being harsh. It was about precision. My phone buzzed under the bench, face down beside my notebook. During a brief recess, I checked it. Judge Chappell, proud of you. Not for the ruling, but for standing firm. I didn't reply, but I let the words linger. The next case began. A property dispute. Dry, technical. I welcomed the shift. Emotional storms had no place here. The law didn't care how my weekend had gone or what I'd thrown in a trash bin in Napa. By noon, the docket was half done. I drank lukewarm tea from my thermos between hearings and watched the clouds shift outside the narrow windows. As the courtroom emptied for lunch, I remained seated. I opened my notebook and jotted a few lines. Reflections, not case notes. Then I paused. I closed the notebook, set my pen down, and leaned back. The room was quiet, not hollow, whole. There was no need for revenge, no need for validation, just peace. This was the room where I became visible, not because someone introduced me, not because a sibling permitted it, but because I earned the right to be here. I folded my robe neatly and gathered my papers. As I reached for the gavel to adjourn, I looked once more across the wood and rows of benches. This wasn't closure. This was clarity. And I would take that over applause any day. The courtroom was quiet again, wooden benches empty, soft footsteps echoing down polished marble floors. But inside me, something had shifted. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter, like the silence that follows when a storm finally passes. All my life, I've lived between the lines, reading people like legal briefs, careful not to cross boundaries, careful not to ask too much. I thought that made me strong. But lately, I've realized that silence can be a kind of prison too, especially when it's built to protect someone else's comfort. I didn't tell the truth to embarrass anyone. I told it because it was time, because I was tired of folding myself into versions that made others more comfortable. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing really looks like. Not revenge, not dramatic goodbyes, but choosing to live fully, without apology. Family doesn't always offer understanding, but it does offer clarity. Sometimes in the ache it leaves behind. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I hope you'll share it. We need more honest stories, quiet courage, and the reminder that even if love looks different than we hoped, it can still be enough to set us free.